Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Uh-oh.
Good afternoon, Mr. Appa.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm trying to get my picture on, but having a bit of difficulty. Okay,
अलग बैठेंगे वो. This is also
start video. Okay. There we are. Good
Yeah.
afternoon.
Placed my phone. Yeah, here you can see you now.
And will be with us soon, but carry on.
Dr. Barot is likely to join.
Yeah, he did say that he will. He says he normally comes in about 10 minutes before.
Okay.
Let's see what happens. Otherwise, I could give him a ring.
Still, we have time to walk in 10 minutes. Nobody. ये जल्दी खाली रहती है.
Yeah.
Unless you feel more comfortable sitting here because you have to
Too close.
watch and not too close.
I'm just ringing Rohit to see what happens. रोहित भाई તમે હજુ દાખલ નથી થયા?
So I just came to the study, so I'm entering now.
Okay, see you soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
It will take me a minute.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
They're waiting on you. Any other people from the college or attending?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
There
sir,
are.
everybody is around, but the camera can cover only these many right now. But all sits around about 30 people here.
Oh, very good.
Just separate the camera. Please.
सिद्धार्थ जी नहीं मत हिलाओ. वो fix
मत हिलाओ,
किया
मत
हुआ है.
हिलाओ.
मत हिलाओ उसे. सेलो टेप से फिक्स किया हुआ है. बड़ी मुश्किल से उसके फिक्स किया हुआ है.
तो यहाँ पे बता दीजिए.
Yes, so there are all faculties from MBA are present here, but since we have a very limited capacity of camera, it's very small,
Yes.
so you can see only the people who are sitting on this side.
Okay, well, you don't have to see us either, you know, we are just happy to listen. Rohit should be asking you to enter now. You heard me talking to Rohit, why didn't you? Did you hear me talking to Rohit Bhai and him saying he should be joining now?
Okay,
Okay,
Mr.
that's
okay.
good.
So should we wait for 5 minutes
Yes,
for
sir.
him to
We
join?
meet.
Take less than 5, I should think. Oh, is that Firzal?
नमस्कार गौतम भाई पीके मेहता
Ah. Oh, okay, Vicky Mehta, yeah.
गुड
Sorry.
आफ्टरनून फ्रॉम हियर एंड गुड मॉर्निंग देयर
Good morning and good afternoon.
There are two methods. The PK method
Yes.
and double method.
एंड माय टू माय राइट इज प्रोफेसर धवल मेहता
Yeah, Dhawan Mehta I know well actually. And
Yes.
once upon a time I used to work in Gulbai Tekra Jhoppadpatti where he used to come as well.
Yes.
Anyhow,
and besides those who are visible to you we have about 30 faculty members present here on this side and that side.
yeah, I'm glad to hear. Oh,
See who you are, it's fine.
make sure that-
Yeah.
Visibility will improve. Mehta sahab.
How
Mehta
about
sahab.
that? That's and
उधर देखो क्या
Mhm.
और थोड़ा एक बस
That's Anne here now.
Hello, ma'am.
Hey,
Hello, I'm just Anne, I'm afraid. I'm not a ma'am.
Mom.
I know, I'm not a ma'am. Good morning. You got us up in time today and ready.
Yes.
this is the
I'm gonna try Rohit again to see.
Dr. Rosie.
Here we are.
Ah, there we go. That's Rohit Bharot.
Where is he? I know I saw it. Yes, I was just wondering if it, that the lady, what's her name?
It's me here. Can you hear me?
Rohit.
welcome, Dr. Varot. This is Dinesh Avasthi from LJ University.
Hello, Rohit
Now,
Bharot.
since
Just a sec.
everybody is in attendance, we can start. So, today, after a long time, we have discussions which are not actually on economics,
Yeah.
and more a kind of periphery of socio-economic aspects and art anthropology and urbanization, and is a multidisciplinary book in real sense. The Outcast Bombay,
Mhm.
City Making and Politics of Poor. So I extend a very warm welcome to all my guests.
Namaste, everyone.
Namaste from.
Namaste, Ji. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Namaste,
sir.
Nehaben. Namaste.
Namaste,
And,
sir.
Namaste.
of course, my colleagues here, Dr. Bis, Professor Mehta and Mehta, Professor Yagnik, Dr. Neha Shah is here, who will be making presentation. And we are looking forward to educate ourselves on the aspects of Bombay. Of course, I have read a very interesting book, The Rich Poor Slum by Rishmi Bansal. But it is on Dharavi. She talks about how economic transformation has taken place in Dharavi and how some of the people have outgrown and gone outside Dharavi and established big businesses, particularly in leather. So that's a very interesting book which I read about a year or 2 years back. It was quite fascinating. And after that, I had an opportunity to be part of a team where one of the writers was working on Dharavi. So we had a lot of things to Dharavi, but a historical perspective of how things have grown across and how society has got fragmented historically, and from people, how it has transformed to bricks and mortar and roads and cement, leaving people behind. So it's a very interesting trajectory. I'm sure Dr. Neha Shah will be presenting all these aspects. And once she is through, we would like to open the floor for question, answer, discussions, supplementations, whatever, you know. So again, very warm welcome to Professor Appa, Dr. Rosetter, Professor Bharot. So is a really good mix of senior academics.
We're delighted. We're delighted to be here.
Hello.
And the younger colleagues, which I have, which makes average age of about 40, taken together. Well, Dr. Shah, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. Please give me a second. I'll change the.
And just a minute, just information. We have already circulated the summary, which is being prepared by Dr. Shah. I hope you have sent it to them.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
हाँ sir.
व्यू में जाकर के प्रेजेंटेशन बाय साइड कर व्यू में जाकर व्यू है ना वो जो 4-5 की बिंदी बनी हुई है वो यहाँ तो करिए अभी तो फिर करिए दोबारा प्रेजेंटेशन आप रहेंगे और बाकी स्लाइड रहेगी बाकी कुछ जगह
Thank you. Yeah.
This
The
one?
second one.
second
दूसरा वाला.
Hang on.
is that
One is a plain
No.
cover. What I thought, what a pity.
the third one?
Okay, fine. Respected Vice Chancellor, sir, esteemed Professor Gautam Appa, sir, Professor P.K. Mehta, sir, Dhaval Mehta, sir, Professor Rossiter, Professor Barot, Jignasu, sir, Siddharji, my colleagues and friends. This is my privilege to make a presentation on this particular book, which Professor Appa suggested. So let me take this opportunity before I start my presentation. Let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Appa to introduce this particular book to me. Usually I'm struggling to read books on economics, but I enjoyed reading this book being a history enthusiast and someone who is little curious about the subaltern history. This book really was really interesting, and I mean, I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, sir, for suggesting this particular book. And thank you also for suggesting various other reading material that I could use for my today's presentation. So always there for nurturing.
All of which is actually due to Anne.
Oh, come on.
She is the one who first found the book, wanted to read it, and so on and so forth. But carry on. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rossiter. It's a wonderful suggestion.
Okay, I'm just Anne, I'm afraid.
Okay. Okay. So here we have this book by Mr. Professor Junaid Sheikh, who is an historian teaching in California, Santa Cruz. And he has this extensive study on caste city making in the city of Bombay. The study is about the development of Bombay in the 19th and the 20th century, and where everybody was like the modernizers and progressive outlook people were thinking that as a city will grow, as the modern economy will take place, caste will gradually wither away. But Professor Junaid is saying that caste is to be seen everywhere throughout the history. And he tries to understand the presence of caste and its role in developing the city in two important aspects. One, in the built environment of the city, and in the languages which is used. So he extensively uses various novels, poems, plays, whereas besides government documents and manifestos of political parties, he extensively uses this literature which depicts the lives of people in that particular time. So basically this book is talking about how the built environment that shape lives and politics of working class in general and Dalits in particular. So it discusses it discusses the politics of poor in the backdrop of the political economy of the urban planning that took in the last century. So as I mentioned, that caste, which in the urban area, many people says that, where is this caste? Now we have overcome this caste bias. B.R. Ambedkar also assumed that caste will wither, or what he said as annihilation of the caste as the city progresses, because he considered that caste is a very, very local phenomenon, and he considered that in the rural area, caste plays a very important role for ignorance of people, and rural areas are highly localized, and so there is an ignorance of people, and it was difficult, according to him, it was difficult to overcome the caste lines in the rural backdrop. And so he also looked up to the urban processes, urban development with modern industrial capitalism. He also looked up to that will change the power dynamics, power relationship, and gradually people will forget about caste. Caste will become redundant. Similar was also the thesis of many modernizers, especially the left-leaning intellectuals, who considered that the process of modernization would help us to overcome the caste. But what happened? The industrial capitalism in Bombay, in fact, attached itself to caste and made it as a part of its metabolic system. I mean, that's what Professor Junaid argues. He basically argues that in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, the development, when the capitalism was in its initial stage, it depended on caste basically because there was a lot of emphasis and a lot of dependency on the kinship network for two important factors. One, raising capital, because these are the small capitalists. They did not have adequate capital and there was no robust financial system. So they required to depend on their caste and kinship network for raising capital. And they also depended on the caste and kinship network for recruiting and disciplining labor. So the two most important factors of production were coming to Bombay, and they were getting attached to the Bombay's economy through caste and kinship network. As the people started coming over here, the governance of city area, city spaces become very important. And as a result of that, beyond the capitalists and the workers, the role of government also entered into the picture, and where government, the colonial government, as well as in the post-colonial era, in the independence era also, the government played a role in which again deployed. When they started planning the city, where caste became an important factor in planning the city. So city became an insidious, subtle but robust. In the city, caste became insidious. It was subtle, but it was robust as it was insulated in the grab of modernity. So as Professor Junaid builds his argument, he says that caste and capitalism, caste is nurtured by capitalism, and capitalism is further reinforcing the caste identities. And in order to explain this relationship between caste and capitalism, he builds his argument by exploring these four important aspects. Number one, by exploring that how industrial growth and the job market developed in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And as people started moving into Bombay, how built environment, and built environment is not only housing, built environment means also the housing, the roads, the infrastructure, the railways, the docks, the sewage system, the water system, everything which is a composite part of the space where you are living and when you are working, that entire that composite space is considered as built environment. So how this built environment reinforced the caste lineages and caste identities. Obviously, when the workers are coming to the city area and workers are directly entering into a productive relationship, so obviously there is also going to be the rise of the working class politics. And when we are talking about the politics of working class, obviously this is the time period when we have to take into consideration how Marxism and the trade union movement of that particular point of time, what were their role and how they looked at caste in this particular background. And in order to explain this entire thing, Professor Sheikh takes a lot of help of a lot of literature, progressively as it was developed as the Dalit literature, and which describes us, which gives us an idea and evidences about that what were the life of people in this particular years of the time. So this is how the book is organized. The book is written into 5 important chapters. The first chapter is housing question and the caste, where he tries to explain the historical factors which made Bombay as a hub for capitalist development till from 1860 to approximately 1950. Then he looks into the working class politics through Marxism, the use of languages, and the social hierarchy which existed into the entire relationship. Third chapter talks about the urban planning and the cultural politics in that particular period. And then last 2 chapters are focused on, dedicatedly focused on literature, specifically Dalit literature, which gives us an idea about the lives of people at that time. Of course, the literature is also used in the previous chapters as well. So where he's trying to find out various evidences to support his argument in the first 3 chapters as well. But the last 2 chapters are dedicated to the literature, and especially in the post-independence period. So what happened? How Bombay grew as an industrial hub. So as we all know that the textile industries came to Bombay. Besides the Bombay dock, right? So because of that, there was a high demand for migrant workers into this particular time. And as I said earlier, the capitalist development, capitalism in that particular period looked for cheap labor and the flexible labor. So they depended on the migrant laborers in that particular point of time. Supply of labor was also very high. That is because the rural areas were not having adequate employment opportunities. That's number one. This was also a period where India faced several famines, and that's why rural area were not able to provide much employment. Third, there was also aspirations to go to city and explore modern life and earn some more. So supply of labor was also very high during this particular point of time. And obviously the supply over demand, and that resulted into overcrowding overcrowding of the space, overcrowding in that particular place. And that's the reason why there was a specific question about accommodating labor into the urban spaces arise. And that's why the need for housing arise in that particular time. When we talk about need of housing, as we have seen also in many Hindi cinema also, that how the slums are overcrowded and how filthy they are, and then they are not constructed in proper houses. People are living in what we call as hut. So many surveys of that time, which Professor Junaid quotes, that the question was not only about the availability, because in that particular point of time of the history, as the supply of labor started rising, demand for housing rises very significantly. And as the demand rises, it shot up the prices of housing, that is a rent that they have to pay. And so often there were houses which were empty, but despite of that, simply because these migrant workers who were very poor could not afford that rent, had to prefer to live in a small hut in the slum area or on the roadsides, which was actually uninhabitable place. So he also argues that there is question was not only related to availability, question was also about the affordability of housing. The way the slums and this housing grew for the poor income group, the working class group, without much of the infrastructure, without much of the other civic communities. As a result of that, the slums became the den for the filth, the dirty area, and as a result of that, there was a clear division between the sanitary space and unsanitary place. So sanitary places were getting related more with the elite communities, and the non-sanitary place were getting more related with the non-elite communities. And that's how the urban space started taking the division of elite versus non-elite, the upper caste versus non-upper caste. So, and this is the basic background in which he's building his argument. And of course, he goes on in talking about the role of the state and emergence of Dalit leadership, which we'll talk later on. in this particular, I mean, why Indian capitalists could not support or could not provide the adequate housing when they were inviting, or they were nurturing more of labor. I mean, they were inviting more of labor, right? And as I said, that basically they required the cheap labor, flexible labor. So if they want 100 labor, obviously they would prefer to have 200, 300 labor before their door, so that they could bargain for lower wages. So that was one important factor which was playing very significant role over there. And when this 200 people against the jobs of 100 are entering the city, obviously there is a significant rise in the need for housing facility, which is creating overcrowding, right? These migrants who are coming for a job in the urban places were mainly small peasants, or they were the landless labor. And a significant proportion of them were Dalits who had no land in their in the rural area on their name. So there was a major migration was from that particular community as well. In order to come to rural, from rural to urban area, this entire process depended significantly on the social network, basically what we know as the Mukaddam. So for Dalits coming to the urban space, you know, they were dependent on Mukaddam, and this Mukaddam become, or jobber, right? So they become the center point for their lives in the city, whether it is about their employment, so whether they need to be recruited in one or the other place, or for getting a house for them. So they also were dependent on Mukaddam for that. If they were in short of money and they wanted credit, so again this Mukaddam came to their help, right? And even if they had some grievance against their employer, right? There was no direct communication between the workers and the capitalist or their employer, but it was always through Mukaddam, because he was the intermediary in this particular relationship, right? So their role, Mukaddam played a very significant, I mean, a pivotal role in building this relationship in the urban area. And because of that, obviously, that Mukaddam would prefer to have a community of a similar caste or similar, homogeneous group. And so, the laborer who were entering the city area were getting more confined, and the interaction with the city spaces were also getting limited to their community and this area. So, okay. So what is housing, right? So in 1901, when in the colonial government felt that, okay, like Bombay is like getting overpopulated, and we need to understand what is this housing problem. So in the first census of 1901, they tried to investigate what is this housing problem, and they defined what is house. So if any construction which has an undivided roof was defined as a house. So migrant workers were basically provided this kind of a house either by their Mukaddam or their landlords, right? Or sometimes by the mill owners when they were trying to accommodate them. Or later on in the later stage, sometimes the state will talk of that. The state also constructed houses for this people. Usually it comprises of 8x8 or 10x10 feet living area, common toilet, common washing area outside it. And so, the Britishers who wrote on this living space of this particular point of time also derived an analogy saying that this housings look like warehousing of people. So they are not housing, but they are the warehousing of people. And they were also like imprisonment because they were all closed, very little ventilation, very little interaction with the outside, very little sunlight. So they looked more like a warehouse or imprisonment. So they could be described that way. People who could not find the affordable tenements were living in huts, so they were just on the roadside or in any common open plots, and that's how those common plots were getting overcrowded. Solution was to build new houses by dismantling or by removing the unhygienic or this inhuman places in which the people were living. That's the solution the colonial government of that point of time offered, right? So they built the Bombay Improvement Trust, right, which was basically to improve the living condition in Bombay. And with that, the demand for expanding the city boundaries also started taking place. Bombay Improvement Trust, which took place in which came into effect in 1896, right? It used caste in allocation of rooms and facility because they considered that caste is a very important administrative category, and they believe that if you are taking caste as an important category, they found it also easier to mobilize and channelize people to locate and habitate them in a particular place. So, according to, this particular Bombay Improvement Trust, they basically documented that how the slums are coming into effect, right? So they documented that, okay, these places are getting overcrowded because there are small spaces where there are more number of people. Then there's a plan that are coming and staying over there, and then there are more relatives coming and entering into the market. So the same space is again shared by more number of people, and then some places it is also getting subletting activities are also taking place, and that's why the same place is getting crowded and crowded and crowded again. And so they considered, okay, this is illegal, right? You have designed a space for 5 people. I mean, for example, if they have designed a space for 5 people, and if there are 15 people living in the same space, they consider it as illegal. So the solution that they came out with was also, okay, remove this and try to relocate and rehabilitate them, right? So that was the important development that took place in order to that was an important response of the colonial government to the problem of this. Second important thing which took place during the same period of time was that there was a development of emphasis on local self-government, right? So a bill on local self-government was passed in somewhere in 1889 or somewhere, and then on the basis of that, the Indian Council Act was passed, and according to that, in the local bodies, especially in the Bombay, the corporate, the local taxpayers, right, were given. They were given the space, and they were they were electing they were contesting the election. They were getting elected, and they were participating in the corporation administration. Basic idea of the colonial government was to distract them from the larger national movement, which had already started growing at that point of time, right? But by engaging them into city development, infrastructure development. So basic objective was to engage them with the management of the local government, and but since these were only the tax-paying people who were allowed to participate in election and to be there, this was a very tiny part of the total population, and obviously that was the elite class and the upper caste. So again, here this is a caste dynamics, right, which comes into the governance of the city, where the small community, the upper caste community, are given the rights or power to manage the city spaces. So I mean, this resulted into like a sort of a vicious circle kind of a thing, right? There was already because of a high demand and much higher supply, city was already getting overcrowded, and this overcrowding was getting accommodated into the same space. So obviously these spaces were getting unsanitary, unhealthy, unhygienic. So solution was to demolish them and build the new colonies. But obviously there was a huge gap between demolition and reconstruction of the new houses. So the process further increased the number of slums and the number of uninhabitable places, because you have demolished the old places, but reconstruction was taking much longer time. So obviously these people were again getting accommodated in the same similar kind of the unhealthy spaces. And since there was this constant fear that our spaces can be demolished, right, there was a constant demand for a safe, secured, rented place, and that further shoot up. Because of that, the rent in the Bombay city further shoot up, and which made the the housing more unaffordable. So this vicious circle continued because the way the city was growing and developing. As I said, that this elite, the second part, that the way the elites were involved into the local government. basically, the elites, the upper caste looked at the lower caste people as unhygienic, filthy, uneducated. And as a result of that, their basic objective was to do the social service, to reform them, control their alcoholism, try to teach them the sanitary practices, right? Try to teach them, give them education, right? So rather than talking about, or rather than emphasizing on emphasizing a system which could build them the houses or the sanitary places, the entire emphasis was on this kind of a social reform. This was also a period when the Hinduism was into the revivalist phase, and so there were this Arya Samaj and other, the other organizations were also coming forward, and for them also the lower caste people were basically, the unhygienic condition of them, or the unsanitary condition of them, was basically the question of their ignorance, or it was a concern of their morality. So in this particular context, there was a demand coming from the Dalits about having their own built houses. And with their continuous demand, and since the colonial government also focused on having caste as a criteria to build the houses, right? The two separate chawls were constructed specifically for Mahar Association. Mahar is one of the Marathi Dalit community, right? Very interestingly, these two buildings were constructed, and then over a period of time, the demand for repairing and improving the amenities increased, right? There were, at one point of time, there were 4 important demands that they put forward. They wanted wire gas for the ground floor for the safety purposes. They wanted a compound wall between the 2 buildings. They wanted a reading room for the Dalit Mahar students, and as well as the concession in the rent, because rent was again increasing. Very interestingly, the trust approved the first 2 demands. They immediately tried to install the wire gauze and constructed the compound wall. But the latter 2 demands, which were more progressive for Dalits, they were not taken into consideration. At that point of time, again, it was argued, the government said we do not have money, and then this continuously this nationalist movement was also taking place. The mutiny had just was over. So a large proportion of the resources of the government was towards that solving those issues, the law and order issues. And that's why they did not have enough money. And so they did not entertain the demand for reading room and other things. The same time, the demand continuously, now this politics, since these people are situated in an uninhabitable condition, the politics of the urban poor is, taking shape, which is into demanding for a better housing, reasonable rent, and the permission to allow to have their own houses. So all this, because of this given condition, the politics was moving in that particular direction, where by 1920s, there was this clear demand coming up from the urban poor for having the rights over their housing. This was also a period when India saw lot of Marxist communists emerging in the urban spaces, and Mumbai was the important hub for that, where many important eminent communist scholars and activists were working in Mumbai. So they were basically, the idea was to invoke a class consciousness and mobilizing the ununited workers against the exploitative systems of capitalism and the imperialism. And this was a period when Britishers also branded communism as a very aggressive ideology, because this was a period when the Red Revolution in Russia had taken place, and which was violent. So obviously there was it was considered as a very aggressive ideology. And so the major communist leaders were being watched, and whatever the communication they were having were also scrutinized. And that was the reason why this communists had a very little access to the communist literature, which was taking place in European countries. So whatever the literature they received were through somebody who has visited and then somehow is able to manage to bring some literature along with them. That was the limited literature that they had. And one of the very interesting person which Professor Junaid talks about is Mr. Ranchhoddas Lotwala. Right, Mr. Lotwala was actually was an industrialist. He was a capitalist. He had his own small industry. But he was of the he supported communist ideology, and then he brought a lot of material from Europe, and he was the one who supplied this lot of literature, including Communist Manifesto, to Mr. Dange. Dange is one of the was one of the very eminent communist scholar of that time. So this literature was coming. Now with this literature, what is to be done? Right, so this is to be used for the awareness, for spreading the idea of communism among the working class. So that need to be translated and transmitted. And obviously, when you are translating and transmitting, you cannot do it verbatim, right? Because it was written in the European context, and in India, we need to domesticate it. We need to understand the vernacular dimensions of that, right? So basically, they tried to domesticate the ideology, but all this while the communists were basically questioning that is caste equal to class? Because in the what Marx had written and what was written in Europe among the communists, caste obviously was not present. They were basically talking about the class relationship. So how to incorporate caste into that literature, which is with the communists of Europe had written, was a big puzzle for the communists at that point of time. So different people try to explain caste very differently. And initially they actually denied the key, okay, caste is, they considered key, okay, caste is going to be disseminated when the capitalism will grow, and so and automatically as the capitalism will grow, the working class will devoid their caste affinity and they will relate more as a class, workers, and so we do not have to worry about the caste as such. So that was the basic role, but in fact, in reality, caste was playing a very important role. So there were some examples where at that point of time, in 1920s, for example, Dalit workers had to drink water from separate pitchers in the textile mills, or the Dalits were not recruited as a weaver because as a weaver they had to put their saliva on the thread, right? And so Dalit saliva was considered to be impure. So obviously, who will purchase this textile? So Dalits were not recruited for as a weaver. So caste was apparent in the practices, even in the urban area and even in the modern industries. Right, so their thesis that the modern industry will help to overcome the caste and caste will become redundant, it was nowhere to be seen. It was very much present and it was very much operating, and they had to consider caste as an important aspect to that. So initially, though the Communist Union did not recognize caste as a problem, but colonial state was recognizing caste as an important administrative category. They were giving houses on the basis of caste. They were promoting housing development society on the on the grounds of caste, and so caste was everywhere. For example, Ambedkar, where they lived, Ambedkar's father, that was a chawl developed by Bombay Improvement Trust and for Mahars, and that's where they had grown up. So caste was everywhere seen. So now that was this puzzle, that how we incorporate caste into this entire thesis of Marxism, right? So for example, Dange said, okay, we consider these Danges tried to find out the relation with Indian history and Indian mythology, and tried to say, okay, he tried to also find out the, the scripture from the Bhagavad Gita, and tried to say, okay, caste was an essential part of that particular point of time as a division of labor. So the concept of division of labor fit into somehow into their thesis, right? So, and that was the argument that they made. Okay, so it was important aspect as a division of labor, but as the society will grow, those dimension of division of labor will wither away. So that was one, argument Dange made, right? So with these understanding, whenever they were translating, that literature which was coming from Europe, or which they were having a very limited access to, when they were translating to circulate among their working class comrades, right? Very interestingly, what Professor Sheikh is observing is, there were a clear hegemonic aspiration of this upper caste communist leadership that can be seen. For example, when you talk about this translation, there are two types of categories, in the literature. One is the abstract categories, like use value, exchange value, mode of production. These are very abstract categories which Marx had used, or Engel had used, or the others had used. When it came to translating this, the translating communists at that time translated it as upayukta vastu, vikriya mol, utpadan paddhati. These are highly Sanskritized, words, Sanskritized. So that needed, more power to further explain to whomever you are circulating. Needed more power. More reasons to go and explain what exactly upayukta vastu means. That ultimately gave some more power in the hands of those who were translating it. So they probably did not do it very consciously, but caste, which is something which is so inherent, and so ingrained in the system, this kind of practices were observed. Another types of, these are the embodied categories, like they use the lumpen proletariat or worker. So for that, the translator used the very urban slangs like mawali or kamgar, right, which was very easy for the readers to understand. So the translating literature of Marxism, of communism, also had this tinge of the caste hegemony. As we proceed further, right, here, what is happening is in 1920s, 1920s was a period when the global economy was facing slump. Market was facing slump, right? And as a result of that, there was a need for rationalization of labor, right? Or there was a need for rationalization of or a wage cut, right? And that was one important thing. Because there was this rationalization of labor or wage cut, it resulted into a more powerfully the working class, forming their own unions and associations in order to protect themselves, or in order to save themselves from this kind of wage cut. This was also a period when Benjamin Bradley, who was a trade union leader of England, visited India in 1927, and he went on talking, addressed several rallies and several public meetings where he talked about what is happening in the European countries, and that also evoked a lot of consciousness among the working class. Okay, what can be the worker class? What can be how the workers are reacting, or how the workers are mobilizing in that point of time. So that was a period in the period of 1920s. This was also a period when the Ranchhodla's Lotwala kind of a people also subscribed a lot of money in order to not only getting the literature translated, but also printed. So there was a lot of circulation of this literature, and which made the literature of communism more widely available among the people living in those colonies. This was also a period when the writer like Anna Babu Sathe, who wrote lots of plays, who wrote lots of poetries, and he made use of lots of folk arts like tamasha, which was like basically focused on the lives of people, their their drudgeries, their pain. So there was a lot of this was used in this particular period. Besides, there were also many other literature which was like now coming up from Dalits, related to which was focused on either workers' lives in Bombay, or the way the domestic violence is taking place, or what is the dichotomy of morality of workers and the jobbers, so which was, all these issues were very close to the heart of workers, and they were experiencing it in their everyday life. So these was getting captured into various literature of that particular point of time. Particularly, if you have to focus to understand what was the situation in this period, right? Annababu Sathe's work, basically what he said as a Lok Natya, right? So where he used the tamasha, and he modified tamasha, because tamasha has an element of vulgarity, and so it was like evoking a lot of issues over there. So he modified tamasha. He said, okay, like we don't want to talk about those issues. We are going to use this form which people are acquainted with, and we are going to talk about various issues which are touching our lives. So in the Lok Natya, there was a lot of documentation of the living space built not for people to live, and when he says that these living spaces are not built for people to live, but they are basically built for the profits, right? So and there were also problems of leasing, subleasing, a problem, and so which created a lot of issues of legality over there. So so all these issues were like discussed in the Annababu Sathe's work, right? And which shaped the minds and ideology and consciousness of working class of that particular point of time. Planners looked at this entire issue from the planning perspective, even in the post-independence period, where the planning was basically the top-down approach, right? So it was basically considered as more scientific exercise, so that they were not talking about caste overtly, but they were basically like trying to say, if we want to improve the living space, right? And in one place it is also written that the Mumbai, which is no more beautiful, we want to improve the Mumbai space. So there were also issues about the way technocrats look at the planning and the way the bureaucrats look at the planning. But ultimately, what solution which was suggested by majority were provision of new housing, because the current housing was still not habitable, still not clean, still not adequate. So providing a new housing, but from where do you get the space? Where do you get the land? So it is by obviously mainly by eliminating the current housing space and rebuilding the space. So this was also coming at that point of time. Modak and Mayers were two planners from US. They were invited just before independence, and they submitted the report post-independence. And there was a lot of insights where the reports were giving, and basically they identified that what is the need for housing, how much the quantum, how much quantum of housing is required, and from where do we get this space. So those issues were basically addressed by Modak and Mayer. But the important thing that happened was that for the first time, like it was recognized, okay, slums are an essential and integral part of the urban life. And so, so there was not overtly, okay, to remove it as a non-habitable place. From that narrative, which was in the pre-independence period, it came into, okay, these are integral part of the our urban life. So try to improve upon them. So that was that focus, the approach shifted from removing just because that being an uninhabitable place to removing it and by rehabilitating it. So that aspect was added over here, right? So with that, so obviously you require a lot of, planning body, planning body needs to be facilitated with legal rights. And for that, the Bombay Land Requisition Act, the Bombay Housing Board Act, these acts were passed, which were basically giving a power to, again, in the hands of the municipal commissioner and the improvement board to acquire land and try to reconstruct the same land. But again, that was this, the idea was, in this entire process, again, what happened was, what happened was, when they were acquiring land, they were acquiring houses, there were a lot of, they were contested again and again into the court for the violation of fundamental rights. Because now we are talking about independent India, and where in independent India, obviously, everybody has a right to live in a dignified way. So unless you do not have an alternative, people would contest, how can you remove from this particular place? So there were a lot of legal battle at that point of time. As a part of this Bombay Provisional Housing Board, they also, designed a policy where the people from backward class, specifically Dalits, all subcastes of Dalits would get credit at a concessional rate, and with that credit, they can build their housing. Now, this these loans are to be repaid in the period of 20 years. In a way, the government and the board was trying to help poor, but what had happened was, since it was linked for 20 years, right? House went from father to son. Same way, the job also went from father to son. Because if this father is given this house, father is a sweeper, and if the father is taking this loan, and if father dies, obviously it becomes a son's responsibility to repay the loan. Now, in order to repay the loan, obviously he needs an employment, and he gets an assured employment only in the place of the father. So here he describes our very interesting character, Ramesh Haralkar. Ramesh Haralkar was a young boy who was very good at painting, and he was a frequent visitor to the Dalit Panthers office in Mumbai. And since he was associated with Dalit Panther, people used to promote him and say, okay, we will send you to the JJ School of Art because you are so good. But again, by the time he was 19, not even 19, his father passes away. And where the family did not have any steady source of income. And as a result of that, instead of the painting brush, he had to pick up the broom, right? And then, so this was one example, since Ramesh Haralkar was moving into the circuit of Dalit Panther, this particular incident is documented. But many, many Dalit children, they had to pick up the same profession which their father had taken up, just because for 20 years they could not manage the loan. So again, this reinforced their occupation, which was directly linked to their caste. So what Professor Sheikh argues is that this way, this was a way the system reproduced the conservancy staff, especially the scavengers and the sweepers, right? Those castes or those labor were reproduced by this particular law. Over a period of time, right, the demand for better housing, previously the demand for the workers were basically focused on improving the wages, but now gradually it is also shifting to having the better housing. And to address to this demand, the Bombay Municipal Corporation, developed under the Vacant Land Tenancy Act, they developed what is known as Janta Squatters Colony in Jogeshwari, right? So now this again very interesting thing happened. In these particular quarters, again, these were as designed by the decent, quote unquote, the decent, standards of living. But again, since there was a constantly rising demand for housing, even in the same quarter, they started subletting those quarters. They started occupying the streets outside. They started occupying the open ground outside. They built a small hut. And so as a VLT holder, they had to pay some nominal rent to the corporation, but that power, I mean, that VLT rights gave them a lot of power to earn a lot of rent. And that again resulted into a lot of development of the substandard slums in near the VLT area. So basically the VLT rights, as the Professor Sheikh says, becomes like a commodity in that particular time. Okay. Yeah. Then another important, the response of the corporation came was in 1964 as a Bombay Development Plan, right, which tried to, rather than the geographical expansion, because so far in the process, the Bombay as an island city had grown into the greater Bombay, when the suburbs were already part of it. When they tried to locate the slums from the central Bombay to the suburbs, and so slums areas were shifting from central Bombay to suburbs, right? But again, even the geographical expansion was not giving the solution. So the Bombay Development Plan of 1964 came out with another abstract mechanism of force space index, which we commonly know as FSI. So now how vertically we can build the housing and what can happen. So second, there was more emphasis coming to the regional planning. So if there's a suburb developing, so how that particular region is going to be developed, and what is going to be at the center. So those aspects were taking into consideration, because again, the fundamental underlining idea was that Bombay, the beautiful is no more beautiful. So by the regional planning, how can we make Bombay beautiful again? So those aspects were taking shape in that particular time. So in the 90s, we see that there are three important types of transition that was taking place in Bombay. One, horizontal. Bombay from an island city, it has got, it has expanded to the greater Bombay. Transition in the process of the modalities of planning. From city planning, now it is the regional planning, because each suburbs were getting planned independently. And then that attitude towards the slum in the city. So previously there was vacate the slum, clear the slum. Now it was coming to more slum rehabilitation. And then we accepted, the corporation accepted, that slums are going nowhere, so slum improvement. So that approach from clearance to rehabilitation to improvement, from 1901 to 1970, this transition took place. Okay. Beneath all this, along with all this development, there was a lot of Dalit literature which was emerging, because now this is a period when we can see that as the Dalits were coming to a city area. And since initial years, there was a colonial government, so they looked after the education. So many of them, the Dalit children were, including Baba Saheb Ambedkar, right, was getting education, and many like them were getting education, the English education. So they had an exposure to the world. They were, and they also took this further. So literacy was gradually growing in this particular period. And so period of 60s, 70s, 80s was a period when there were a lot of Dalit, a lot of people from Dalit who were able to express themselves creatively. So Dalit literature thrived in the period of 60s to 70s. And these are basically the people who had grown into the slum area. But by and large, they had the higher education, and even if they had no higher education, they were at least literate. So they were able to read, write. And they were able to, there were platforms like Siddhartha College, which was established by Baba Saheb Ambedkar. So this college, or Dalit Panther movement. So these were the platforms where there were many interactions were taking place, and they were able to express, they were able to interact with each other. And so they were able to, develop their own consciousness that, what are our lives? It is something different than what is written in the mainstream literature. So here they got a lot of exposure, they got a lot of platforms to express themselves, and because of that, a new genre of Dalit literature, which we all know, Maharashtra was the hub, the rather pioneer for development of the Dalit literature. So here in the Bombay, a lot of literature developed. the basic problem that this Dalit literature had was to constant fight against the basic norms of aesthetics, basic norms of the values that the dominant class had already established into the literature, because their language, their expressions, their experiences were completely different than what was depicted in the upper caste literature. So I mean, there were many important writers. I'm just picking up few. Anna Babu Sathe, who's Loknatya, I already talked about. Dhale, Namdev Dhasal, Baburao Bagul, right? They all grew under the leadership of Ambedkar, and they started, developed a new category of expression beyond the pain and exploitation, which they call as humiliation. Because what their experience was not only exploitation, their experience was not only pain, their experience was more of a day-to-day humiliation. So that started getting depicted into their literature. The process, I mean, they started writing, but along with that, obviously, there was also a desire for getting a recognition from Marathi literati. There were also, a desire for getting awards and getting a wider acceptability, right? So, the desire for getting recognition was, very strong among them. So here is one very interesting example. When Namdev Dhasal, he wrote his first poem, and which was a path-breaking poem, that is, and for that he wanted Vijay Tendulkar to write his preface. So he approached Vijay Tendulkar. Vijay Tendulkar asked him, okay, send me your poems. So I'll read, I'll go through it, and I'll write the preface for that. After reading these poems, Vijay Tendulkar called back Dhasal, and he said, I don't understand your language. Imagine someone who is a master of literature, who's master of words, coming up and saying, I don't understand your language. I don't understand your expression. Where is it coming from? What are these expressions? Dhasal took him and had a guided tour in the slum area of Kamatipura. And till 3 o'clock in the night, Dhasal and Vijay Tendulkar moved in that area. And there is a long description of the experiences of Vijay Tendulkar, which are written over there. That how unhygienic place is that how even the ill bodies, the sick bodies were also commodified. It did not matter whether they are in a good health or bad health, right? So, so the way the sex workers were leading their lives over there, the way the children of sex workers were leading lives over there. So it was such a gloomy place. And he said that this is like, a self-consuming space. It's no point it is possible for people living over here to come out of it. So he said these words, that the world of Dhasal's poetry, that is the world known as a Golpit, that area is known as Golpit in the city of Mumbai, begins where the frontier of Mumbai white-collar world ends and no man's land opens up. He's saying this is a no man's land. And this is the world where night is reserved, night is reversed into day and the stomachs stay empty. So this is what Tendulkar wrote ultimately for this preface, so I'm cutting this short because there's a lot of other literature which he talks about, right? He talks about the way lives are depicted in Bagul, the way their ideology are depicted in Bagul or in Dhasal or the other literature. But I'm cutting it short because there's no point. I mean, there's no time for that, right? Ultimately, while ending and concluding the book, he comes to 1980s when this Bombay textile mill strike of 82-84 takes place. Strikes collapsed in 1984 because the mill owners withdraw from the industry, right? And the new textile policy came in force in 1985, which facilitated the sales of mill land. And so by end of 1980s, many mill, right, which were closed, had closed down. And now this mill, instead of this mill, now the multi-story buildings, the high-rise building for the elite class had started coming up. So, this strike was basically, as the workers said, that this was for hope for the better future, but ultimately that again displaced them from a status of a worker to more informal worker, right? This was also a time when Shiv Sena and the right-wing politics started picking up, and many of them joined this particular period. So the caste difference fragmented the working class, as he ends by saying, but it did not eliminate the class politics or class analysis. Interestingly saying that the urban poor displayed an ability to transit ethnic differences and revealed a fierce class consciousness at a particular historical moment. But once that historical moment passed, again they fragmented back into the caste. So he says that it is this entire process, whenever there is a struggle, it united them as a class. But again, when that struggle, there was no apparent struggle over there, they again got fragmented into caste. So this is what the book is talking about. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you can put this paper.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so.
Well, shall I say something,
at
if that's
the-
all right? Yes. No, what I really wanted to say was this, that this was an excellent presentation by Dr. Shah, number one. Number two, there is such a lot in the book. So I'm going to order a copy to read it properly and to try to understand different dimensions of city life. What I find most interesting is the contrast between the studies of caste and communities in 1950s and 60s, which was presupposing a little rural community which was internally hierarchically divided between the Brahmins at the top and, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, etc. And so, and the analysis tended to, of course, many anthropologists, I was thinking of my supervisor, Adrian Mayer's study of a small village in Rajasthan. It's absolutely wonderful for the time during which it was constructed and published. By the way, he's 98 years old, and I'm not much younger either. Anyway, so but the thing is this, that those studies were valuable in giving us a perspective of rural working of a traditional caste system. Whereas something like this is just a completely different, because what Professor Junaid has done is to contextualize development of different caste and sectarian groups in much wider a historical context, as well as in the context of city planning, housing, etc. You do not get the same kind of focus on housing in little studies, or rather in studies of little communities in different parts of India, valuable as they are. And I must thank Dr. Appa, Professor Appa, and Dr. Shah, and all the members of the team for organizing this. And I hope it will be available online, YouTube or whatever, because I'm quite sure that others would like to see. I would certainly recommend it to some of my colleagues and friends. So all I can say is thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your kind invitation. And I'm about to order the book soon after the session is over. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, Dr. Barot. So nice of you to initiate the discussions. This has been a very wide canvas, in fact,
Yes.
time frame wise and theme wise, right from caste formations to class formations to urbanization to literature, and so it has been a very wide canvas. And all of us are more used to fragments of one aspect of the whole study or the other. I would open the discussions. If you have any question or supplementary, or you want to say something, you're most welcome. Professor Appa, Dr. Rosita, or Dr. Mehta, anybody could take a lead So, Dr. Appa, would you like to make some comments to, or Dr. Rooster, some initial comments, and then we can open the floor for our in-house faculty.
I'll try to be as brief as I can.
Speak up.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Because my
yes.
one-
yes.
Okay,
Sure,
good.
please.
I found it fascinating, the presentation. I
Absolutely.
learned so much from the presentation as opposed to just looking at chapters of the book. And the question that arises in my mind is that this is not just peculiar to Bombay. There are similar sort of things going on within the communist movement, in the literature, in all over India, but in the main, I think in Gujarat itself, one would love to know where, for example, in Ahmedabad, are pockets of Dalits and how they are reacting to different things. I remember a book that I saw from Kerala, I think, a Kerala communist, who spent his life doing communist work, but at the same time, because he came from a Dalit family, was always dismissed, quote unquote, by the communist movement or considered to be a second category person. And so it goes on. So literature from Gujarat will be very, very interesting.
Yes.
I had known when I was living there of poets and activists in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, who had spent time writing about the situation of the Dalits, but also commenting on what was going on in their own area. So I look forward, Sneha, Neha, I don't know why I keep calling her Sneha, to having more to learn from you
About Gujarat.
about Gujarat especially. Thank you.
Can I speak? Can I respond?
I think we will
Respond
take
together.
questions you can note down so that they otherwise the overlaps. And
Sure, sir.
Dr. Rojikar, would you like to make some comments?
Well, I'm astounded, and thank you very, very much, Dr. Shah, for such a brilliant presentation. It's a lot of stuff, honestly, but you managed it, and I am absolutely amazed. I wouldn't have been able to manage all that. I really wouldn't, because my voice would give out, and you were robust the whole way through. In effect, you opened our eyes to so much. I have read the book. I noticed it in a review, I think in the Weekend Guardian here, and it sounded brilliant, the kind of thing I'm interested in, which is the amalgamation of people's experiences as expressed through literature. I'm Irish after all. I would be interested in literature to explain and contextualize so many different experiences. I also come from a very divided country where sectarianism rides high, and it is two communities pitted against each other in Northern Ireland, and the rest of the island has been independent since 1922. But also I was interested in the question of sex and women, which is touched. I would have loved to have seen more about Dalit women and how much they form the backbone of some of the twilight areas, as they're called, in Mumbai and elsewhere. That was apparent to me, asking just a few questions in English, which means you are only speaking to middle-class people. I can't communicate with the women themselves, unfortunately, without a translator. And it was apparent to me that they form the backbone of many of the red light areas. I would have loved to have heard more of that. I hear some things from Gautam about it in relation to Ahmedabad. So you brought it all to life, and thank you. I'm delighted. And I hope it goes somewhere, this, beyond our small little community this morning. And you got us up early, which was great. And the sun is shining here for once. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. That's so nice of you. Dr. Dr. Mehta wanted to say something. You can.
When we present a book, we expect a critical review. She has done a wonderful job, but I do not get a clear hypothesis as to what author wants to prove. He facts, not related by cause and effect relationship. We are a business school. We believe in input, output, feedback, and again in input. Now, we do not get an answer as to why Marxists were unable to turn Dulles into a proletarian class. The book should have given an answer to the question that why Marxists in Bombay failed to turn the Dulles class into a proletarian class. We don't get a clue. Similarly, the slums which are created in Bombay, these are not the usual phenomena. I have seen in Brazil, favela. Every industrialization, including in England, has brought the class differences and has created slums. Even in England, after 1780, London was nothing at that time, and the slums were created. So, what does the author want to say when industrialization brings slum in Bombay? I wanted a statistical analysis of in the slums, how many are people, I am a businessman, business student, and how many are Dalits, and how many are non-Dalits in the slums, and how they are treating each other. The author claims that he wants a relationship between class and class. I don't find a single explanation or a narration. I read the books by academics. This is written by journalists. Some journalists are very good, but this is a book without hypothesis and without causatory explanation. When politics is based on caste, the book never brings out the fact that in India, politics is based on caste and parliament is formed on the basis of different castes, and therefore caste constitutes. Again, input, output, and consequences. The Dalit movement, which was started not in Bombay but in outside Bombay, later in Bombay, but what did it achieve in terms of getting equalitarian culture is a moot point. I wanted to know the consequences of the book's name is Outcast Bombay. The book sometimes emphasizes slums, which are not made only of outcasts. By outcast does it mean poor people? Poor people are everywhere due to the industrialization. Or he means Dalit. By Dalits are not organized and accepting at a level of their own. So their literature, Dalit literature was very powerful. What effect did it bring to Bombay in removing the inequality or making them less humiliated? In that sense, American radical Panther movement created a lot so that many people are now in the top positions in the industry. I wanted from this book Outcast Bombay as to the industry which was established by Parsis, Gujaratis and Marwari. And Maharashtrian accepting Kirloskar was not an industry. There was no industrialist accepting Kirloskar for the Maharashtra. I wanted to know from the book in a causal chain as to by outcasting means only scheduled caste or the poor people, because sometimes books talk about poor people, which is made of several castes. In the slums of Bombay, there are outcasts, there are poor people, there are sometimes Brahmins, and there are Baniyas in the slums. So, poor and outcasts, they should be separately differentiated and their causation. cause and effect relationship should be factorized.
Oh, she did that.
This narration, so many facts are not combined to create a link or to do a hypothesis. That is, any book, when it is presented, should have a critical analysis as to where it fails. Because this is a journalistic attempt, I don't find any statistical backup that how the book doesn't mention that now there is a great lobby of owners. It is mill owners who are coming from scheduled caste. If they are getting in Bombay, there is a huge number of entrepreneurs who are coming from middle class, and they have an association and they are doing very well. You know, any book which is written to explore a problem with a hypothesis needs a different treatment. And I think that statistical backup is necessary. I congratulate Neha for the presentation, but I'm baffled by the fact that I am not able to understand what the book wants to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. Anybody else?
Dr. Who?
Please come forward.
I'm criticizing only a book, but the presentation was very good.
No, in any way,
I mean,
she can't be held responsible for anything.
No.
written, so, so
I should not be misunderstood. I'm
since
talking about the author.
since she
Author
has
who has not done the homework.
since she
Or
has
not an academic.
Doctor, since she has read more than what we have read, she will be able to answer some of your queries as per the author. But otherwise, she is as good as all of us.
Yes,
So,
excellent.
yeah, any
But
comments
I'm
from this
talking
side?
only about the author who is giving facts.
Yeah,
without any relationship. Facts which are not related
Yeah,
to the main issue.
Professor, there are differences between PhD thesis and a book, journalistic book. We should also remember that if we collect data, we analyze.
Yes. That
But
is what I-
in sociological books or anthropological books, I think we normally do not base it on regressions and multivariate analysis and correlations and all that. Is a sociological or anthropological analysis which normally is out of the purview of data from that point of view. If there's
Not a book.
no, I mean there is no point. If you want to say something on this.
See, to me, it's a qualitative analysis of the situation and the events that happened alongside the, the situations that were created due to the distressed migration. Mostly, the urbanization was basically caused due to distressed migration. If you read the book very elaboratedly, it says that migration from rural and semi-urban areas because of better opportunities resulted into a very quick urbanization of Mumbai. And the author has tried to really focus on one item that, contrary to the hypothesis that modernization and urbanization will collapse the caste structures, it has not happened. It has not happened in this particular case. That is the emphasis. The caste and class dynamics prevailed despite the general belief that modernization and urbanization will collapse those structures. And I mean, within each caste, also the classes developed to an extent that there was a big hierarchy within each caste. I see a similar phenomenon happening in Ahmedabad, wherein I come across places like Soniwad, Soni Ki Chali, Javeriwad, and all those places where similar things would have happened. I've not done the historical study, but I think, yes, same things would have happened while the Ahmedabad was developing as Manchester of India. That's what I would like to say. Thank you.
I think that is a very valid explanation of hypothesis. And the hypothesis that the two class and castes, they merge somewhere. I mean, there is a saying that one should not, it is better not to open one's mouth and let people think that you are a fool rather than opening it. So I want to avoid that situation because I'm not a sociologist. I'm a hardcore economist. But there were two things I wanted to just highlight. One thing is any reference to Sanskritization. Professor Barot will notice entire thesis of M.L. Srinivas. Then how Sanskritization plays a role in whole transformation of caste, upward movement of castes. And I will think that as you move up the economic space, your castes get diluted and the system is so that cruel, but that it is like a vortex. The moment you are economically better off, it co-opts you irrespective of your class. I mean, the moment you have a middle and a billionaire, caste will really matter little because you are co-opted, or members of parliaments are co-opted, ministers are co-opted. I mean, so the whole process of Sanskritization, where you try to imitate the upper class and try to transform yourself to the next and the next and the next, it plays role. Has something happened like this in Mumbai? I am not very sure. I don't know. But as Dr. Mehta was saying, that there are a lot of Dalit entrepreneurs, maybe Sanskritization must take place. Second thing is, like, if I was there, I would have given some space to Indian films. They were very powerful instruments of communication. See, not many people read literature. Even if they read literature, they are not able to draw conclusions or draw something from that, which will, for them it is a story. But a story, I'm not very sure how much it will affect. But the Indian films, particularly if you look at Barra Sani and people like the poets, Mr. Azmi or Sahil Ludhianvi, if you look at Ritik Ghatak or Milal Sen, look at actors like Nasiruddin Shah and that ilk. So, and the films like Garb Hawa, and then you had Do Bigha Zameen. So those kind of films, if you look at, they had much more impact. I mean, I know they have not brought revolution in the society, but they did make an impact. I wish he had made some even footnote of impact of films on these movements. That would have made it more interesting. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not possible to do everything in a book. It's a fantastic book, I will say. But if it was added, probably it would have added much more interest. Film, small footnote on films and all that, did the role and all. But my comments are restricted to that. I mean, as far as rehabilitation or redevelopment, I know my friend Sheila Patel, who runs Spark, is a big organization working on rehabilitation of Dharavi. They have not succeeded in the last 25-30 years. They have been struggling and not succeeded. The socio-political economic dynamics is so strong and cruel. It's very, very difficult for any government to put hands. So it's not easy really to redevelop any slum, even if government wants. There are a lot of issues. Ground floor and first floor and second floor, the space which you work economic activities on the ground floor, and your economic activities are dependent on that space which you have. And once it is redevelopment, everything goes. So there are issues. But congratulations to you, Dr. Chuck, for making such a nice presentation. We have gained a lot of this. And I'm tempted to read the book.
Yes.
This is what is the impact. I would like to see what is there, more details, because it has provoked me for certain questions which I am seeking answers for that. So this is just my comments, but any further comments from Dr. Mehta you would like to
I
say?
just agree with you that I was going to say that, in fact, congratulations, Dr. Neha,
Thank you,
for
sir.
a very good presentation. In fact, it is because of your presentation that I would repeat what Professor Awasthi has said. I am also tempted to read the book,
Thank you, sir.
precisely for a few reasons. Because there are some questions in my mind, which perhaps I was very carefully listening to your presentation. I found that mostly it talks about industrial development, it talks about literary development, it talks about everything. Now, nowhere there is a mention of Gujarat and Gujaratis. Bombay has been developed to a very large extent by Gujaratis. This is why what I have read.
This issue in
And
particular.
several areas. I mean, you may be more familiar with that, all other people. There are several areas which are predominantly inhabited by Gujaratis, developed by them. You take diamond industries,
Gujarat,
you
I
take
used to.
steel industry, you take textile industries, and Gujarati literature. If you get Gujarati Sahitya Parishad, Gujarati Sahitya Parishad na satro Mumbai ma yojaya છે. And I think if I am not wrong, Gandhiji had presided over one such satra in Mumbai. So what is this? Maybe perhaps his scope, he decided that I'll talk only about Marathi literature and I'll talk only about Dalit literature. But that perhaps is good for a PhD thesis. You limit the scope. When we talk about the development of that, perhaps that is something. So from that point of view, I wanted to read the book and then say about it. So right now it will be too premature for me to say anything.
Yeah, that's very good.
But thanks for creating.
So Dr. Appar, Dr. Rositer, any concluding observations?
It's been good. It's been good to get this discussion.
Or Dr. Barot, because of Sanskritization and all that, if he has to add something. Yes, please.
Rohit Bhai,
Rohit,
your turn.
Yeah, yes, I'm with you. I mean, what you said is slightly muffled. So I'm sorry I did not quite catch what you were asking me to say.
No, I just said that on the aspect of Sanskritization and its role in transforming the.
Oh, Sanskritization is obviously one of the key conceptions for understanding the way in which a particular Jati community transforms its culture along with its economic position.
Absolutely.
And that provides, of course, a channel of mobility over a period of perhaps 100 years. I mean, we have many examples in India. I was particularly thinking of the Nadar community.
Oh, yes.
The toddy tapper, they used to sell local alcohol. They would climb the toddy trees and extract, the juice and whatever. But then through the colonial period, they branched off in trading, and the economic basis provided a strong quest for improving their, if you like, way of life. And essentially what it meant was to emulate and imitate the upper caste modes of behavior. Well,
Yes,
that is not unproblematic if you take into account now in the present millennium, there's quite a lot of opposition to the idea of Sanskritization, and it is potentially a strong feeling of, well, not animosity, but very critical view of the Brahmanical culture, which has imposed itself all over India.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Gautam.
Yeah. So I think, you know, there's quite a lot. I mean, I think the book is, I mean, this is my opinion based on what it is that Dr. Shah presented to us. And it seems to me that this is an extremely valuable study. It cannot do everything that we expect from Mumbai. I mean, the reality of Mumbai is just absolutely overwhelming, even for a, you know, even for a good scholar. And therefore, I think what Sheikh Junaid has done is a very valuable contribution to an understanding of the way in which the structure of Mumbai developed and in which caste and communities interacted in various ways. And there were, of course, you know, social divisions along the caste line or divisions combining caste and class realities. So I have found the presentation most valuable, and the discussion that we had has been brilliant. And once again, I would like to thank my friend, Dr. Gautam Appa, for he's my friend as well. So, thank you very much for the Mitra Bhav.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, all the participants. And Dr. Neha Shah, you are hiding somewhere. Oh, there you are.
Thank you,
Oh, yes. So, thank you very much indeed. And it has been a splendid occasion. And I have been absolutely delighted to be a small participant in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Professor Pan, Rosetta, anybody?
I was just going to say that it has been very, very amazing to see such a discussion at this level taking place at LJ. I'm really, really proud of that fact. And I hope we will see more discussions and seminars based on other books and so on. As to this particular one, it has been absolutely brilliant, and can't thank enough Dr. Neha Shah for presenting such a valuable, in such a valuable way, her own presentation, and then that led to all this discussion. So thank you again, and I hope to see more of you taking part next time, or this time perhaps, I don't know.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Marete gamade ekvar avjo. Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely delightful. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Professor Appa. Thank you, Dr. Rosetta, Dr. Barot. It's been indeed a great pleasure to have you here. I actually, I mean, on the suggestion of Professor Appa yesterday, you know, I'd collected some Gujarati literature, which is indicating on the similar lines, but time did not permit us. But sir, as you said, it's very right that there are a lot of expressions in Gujarati literature as well on the similar lines. And we see the similar lines of development in Ahmedabad, and I wish I was a historian and equipped with those techniques to undertake a similar kind of study. But yes, sir, I mean, Bombay is just one example which shows that what has happened in the urban spaces. So thank you, sir, for guiding. Your guidance was really valuable. The literature you provided was also very, very important and useful inputs for me. So thank you, sir, for being there. Thank you, sir. Thank you, all my colleagues and sirs to be here and be so appreciative, though it was a very lengthy and very exhaustive presentation, but you all listened to it very carefully and patiently. So I take this opportunity to thank everyone for being there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
bye.
very much. Lovely to see you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Can I disconnect now?